Hello and welcome to Integral Centering. I'm Robert Strohmeyer, and today my guest is Dr. Robert Wood, a former entrepreneur and business leader turned professor of transpersonal psychology. He earned his master's degree at Naropa Institute and his PhD from the Institute of Transpersonal Psychology, most recently having served as the chair of the Transpersonal Psychology Department at Sophia University. Dr. Wood specializes in research in spirituality, eco-psychology, and shamanism, and has deep personal experience in the journey of personal transformation. Dr. Wood, thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure to be here.
Today, we're going to be talking about what we'll call the Phoenix process or the Phoenix effect, and how our greatest crises can lead to our most powerful potentials. This is something, Dr. Wood, I know you have experienced deeply in your own life, and I hope that we'll have an opportunity to touch on some of your own journey in our conversation today. What brought you on this journey? I know that you didn't begin as a professor of psychology. What brought you on this journey from business leadership? I mean, you're a Juris Doctor, a lawyer, an attorney, and an executive. What took you on this path?
Well, I like to believe that that what took me on the path was my soul. The essence that, and by that I mean the part of me that wants me to be the best version of myself that I can be. And I think that in the early days of my life, when I was a phoenix flying high, if you will, I didn't listen to that part of me very well. I had lived a lot in my mind, and getting an education, legal education, and studying as a CPA and all of that really tended to focus on my mind, the abilities of my mind. I grew up on a farm, a chicken farm, and my goal early in life was not to remain on the chicken farm. So I was I was driven to succeed in the version of success that I understood at the time. And so I was granted an opportunity pretty early in my career to start a new business with some other people that were older, a little more experienced than I. But we started this company, and it was like the American dream. I mean, it grew very rapidly. We went public, we were successful, all of us personally, and the company was successful. And sadly, I think that during that time of my highest success, flying high is using your metaphor of the phoenix, is when I really was in a deep sleep as far as my soul was concerned. And I have a feeling that my soul was even then trying to reach out to me and say, this isn't it. This isn't what your life is meant to be. And I was so good at tamping down that feeling that my soul, I believe, had some basis in the catastrophe, if you will, that it took for me to open. I've written about this somewhat, and I said, so deeply did I slumber that it took an alarm clock of extreme volume to wake me up. And extreme volume was my company was acquired in a friendly acquisition by a much larger company. And that larger company had no idea how to run a small company, but they tried to do their big company methods in our small company, and the company just failed catastrophically. And I mean, there were all kinds of lawsuits, finger pointing, our company was in Salt Lake City, Utah, there's not a whole lot of big companies that start in Salt Lake City. So it was broadcast big time in the news, this spectacular failure. And I went from being pretty proud of who I was and what the company was to just almost wanting to cover my face as I went out in public, just felt like everybody was pointing, looking at me like, there goes a failure. And so, I mean, it was in that pile of ashes, if you will, that I heard a calling.
What does that calling sound like to you? The journey already to this point, I think a lot of people would consider that a whole life's journey, right? I mean, coming from growing up on the chicken farm to, all of the stages of that path that would be a montage in a film, right? Qualifying for law school, becoming a CPA and an attorney, building the successful business, getting to what I think everybody who is involved in some kind of a startup venture would think is the ultimate goal, right? The exit. Already that can seem so much like a complete journey, and yet for you, it has this sound of being a beginning. What was it that in that crisis, that moment of incredible loss that sounds so painful, you're hearing this call? What is that? What is that? What did that sound like to you? How did you recognize
I think that my soul, but I'll call it that because that's what it feels like to me, that um, that part had just been tamped down and not listened to. And I think as I reflect back, I mean, I think on the times when my soul did try to call me and say, this isn't the best version of you that is possible out there. And I mean, it may look like success from the outside to the world, but this isn't who you are, you know. And I have to say, I felt, I was the CFO of this company and would, travel around the world, talking about the company, and I'd stand up and explain what we're doing and all that stuff. And you'd think that's pretty heady stuff, but there was something in me that said, that's not who you really are. This is not the authentic you that is out there. And so when I heard the call, Robert, it's interesting. It's just like what it was. The call that I heard was a brochure that my wife brought home from a massage therapy session she'd had with this kind of hippie chick, right? That was her massage therapist. That hippie chick I came to love and respect greatly. But she brought home this brochure, and it was about a modern day vision quest. And it was offered by a company called Animas Valley out of Durango, Colorado. And Bill Plotkin was the founder and the leader of this group. But as soon as I saw that, I guess my soul was able to get through to me. But I said to her, I'm going to do this. I want to do this.
For those who may not know what a vision quest is, um, can you briefly just share with the audience what does this mean, a vision quest? I think it's a commonly heard term, but one that I think deserves a little definition.
Sure. Yeah, it does. And I'll tell you, I was right where your listeners and viewers are now. When I saw this thing about a vision quest, I had no idea really what it was. And it in the brochure it described a little bit about it. And it's it's a process or a ceremony that is based on a 40,000-year-old tradition that is found in all peoples, native peoples all around the world. And it's the process of growing up, of going from one stage of childhood to adulthood. And they do it in a formal ceremony. In the West, your dad tosses you the car keys. That's the ceremony. Okay, now you're an adult. I got the keys. But traditionally, for thousands of years, a native person would go out into the wilderness and there would be a separation. It was divided into pretty distinct parts. There'd be a separation. You'd separate from your family, from your tribe, and you would go into the wilderness alone. And there you would endure various tests of just being out there alone. And then you were to receive during that time a new name was the a part of the tradition, and a gift, an understanding of what your gift was that you would bring back. And the third part of the thing is reincorporation or return. You come back to your people and bring them a gift.
What was it that you experienced in this vision quest?
I just can't say or emphasize enough how much those few days on this vision quest have influenced all the rest of my life. And what I experienced was I went to Durango, Colorado, and there were a group of us. I think there were about 8 or 10 of us who were going on this quest together. We had two guides. One of them was Bill Plotkin. One of the first ceremonies we did as a preparation was some Native American traditions of like a smoke lodge. And I thought that was like the experience of my life at that time, just surviving that whole thing. And but then we went from there to we drove down to the Canyonlands area in southeastern Utah. And we hiked down. I mean, I think it's symbolic actually that we hiked down deeper into who we are. And there we set up a base camp and we did some more ceremonies. One thing that we did is a ceremony that I think many of your listeners will relate to, and that is we had a ceremony where we just burned something and let it go. And I took the IPO prospectus from my company, and that's what I burned and let go. It's kind of to me, it symbolizes I'm letting go my past life. All those things that I thought were success, I'm just burning those. And then we found a place that was Bill Plotkin kind of gave us a little bit of a description of the area around and say, now from this description, you go in the direction that you think is calling you. And we found a place that was each of us had an individual place. And we came back, and Bill knew the terrain so well that we described the place to him, and he knew where it was. And then he paired us up with people whose places were closest, and we went out. We started fasting. At night, we fasted, and the next morning, we went to our place. And we went as far as we could with our buddy and then separated. And my buddy and my place were, maybe a mile and a half or so apart. You're still pretty alone. And when I got to this place, one of the first things I did is just sat down, and it looked down into a canyon. It was up against a canyon wall and looked down into a canyon. And I sat there and looked down into the canyon, and I saw these rocks that were all kind of stacked up in weird formations. If any of you are familiar with that country, it's just magical. It's amazing. But I saw in these rocks, I started seeing figures in these rocks. Like I saw Karl Marx in a rock, and I saw Abraham Lincoln, and I saw Gandhi, and I saw Martin Luther King. And I saw these faces in these rocks, or it's like it was more than the face. It was like the whole person was there. And again, I will humbly admit that I was so asleep that I didn't recognize that my soul was trying to speak to me, even in these visions, if you will, that I saw in my experience. Souls generally don't speak in language; they speak in symbols and myths, like in your dreams. I think that your dreams are your soul trying to get past your ego, and get a message to you, and they speak in symbols. And I think here didn't recognize this in the beginning, but I was just, kind of confused by what am I seeing here? Why am I seeing these things? And also, during this time, I spent a lot of time with this pinyon pine tree. And I'm pointing back here because the place where I'd sit all the time, the pine tree was here. And this pine tree was growing out of the rock. I tell you, there was no dirt or anything around. This tree was growing just out of the rock. And it was a pretty tall tree, but it had been beat up bad by the weather. I mean, I think from where it was on this exposed place, growing just out of the rock, I mean, there was a bunch of branches that were broken, and yet it was standing there, so tall and so proud. And I would talk with this tree, and I said, I told him my story that I'd just been really beat up. The tree, I mean, even then I could see that the tree was saying, brother, you don't know what being beat up is. But it was like a kindred soul there, that I listened to. And I had this one experience. We were out there alone for 4 nights and 3 days. And we were fasting all this time. And I think when you reflect back on the native peoples who kind of created this ceremony, they knew, though they wouldn't have used these words, they knew that there had to be something that shut down the ego so that your soul could be heard, And there's all this din that is always going on in all of our minds. It's all ego driven, and egos play a part. They keep us safe and everything like that. But that's kind of all they worry about is keeping us safe. Sometimes growth isn't safe, you know. So anyway, the fasting quieted the ego. I mean, you're just having to surrender to the climate around you, the situation that you're in, nature. You're in nature. You don't feel alien. You feel held. And unfortunately, a lot of modern humans do feel alien. And I think I would have before, but finally your ego gets beat down. And I was sleeping one night and there had been, thunderstorms. And if you've ever heard a thunderstorm in like a canyon where there's a whole bunch of canyons, it just sounds like freight trains and echoes and rolls. And all of that was pretty scary. And I think the scary part also quiets your ego. But anyway, I'm sleeping here and I hear this noise in my camp. It was something that was big and I could hear it breathing. And I was in my sleeping bag and I didn't dare look over at it. I didn't want to make eye contact with it for sure. But it walked pretty close. I mean, I don't know, maybe it was 10 feet, maybe it was 6 feet. It seemed like it was 2 inches. It came over pretty close. It stood up and kind of sniffed at the water. And I'm like, okay, you can have the water. And then it just walked on and left. And I've got to honestly admit, I never saw the bear. I did not look. But in the morning, there were bear tracks uh, all around. I mean, it was also served just to scare me, and I was and shut down my ego. That the point. I was certain that the bear would hear my heart pounding, and I thought it was echoing off of the walls. But it was again there was a lesson in just that experience. To be so afraid, have such a powerful creature of nature just let you be, you know, let you be. At the last night of the Vision Quest, the last night I was going to be out there alone. The next morning I was going to hike and find my buddy, and we were going to hike back. But I created a sacred circle, and I stacked some rocks in each of the four directions, and then made a circle of rocks, and then sat in the middle of this thing. So I sat there and I stayed awake all night. And I was reflecting on, has, what have I learned? I'm almost done with the Vision Quest. in me telling you this story, you think, wow, you had a chance to learn a lot. And I did have a chance to learn a lot, but still, as I sat there, I it it had not gotten through to me. I sat there all night and thought, well, towards the as the dawn was breaking, I thought, well, this has been a good experience. I've been humbled, and I guess that's the experience. And I start to stand up to walk away, and I heard the words, "Set your people free." And the thing that is humbling about that is that my soul just did not give up on me. Kept trying to teach me through symbols, um, and I just wasn't getting it. And finally, it spoke language I understood. Since coming back from that vision quest, even then, you'd go, "Well, yeah, dummy, finally you got it." But even then, coming back, I just reflected for a long time on what does that mean? What does it mean? Set your people free. And not a day of my life goes by. And this happened when I was about 40 years old. And you can tell from this, I'm quite a bit more than 40 years old now. But there's not a day of my life that goes by that I don't reflect on set your people free. And it has had different meanings to me at different stages in my life. The initial thing was my family, and we had been part of a pretty repressive religion. And I gathered the family all together and I said, look, I know that I've put a lot of time into this religion and I've made you all go to church and stuff like that. But I'm telling you now that it's 100% up to you. I will make up my mind. Your mother will make up her mind. You all make up your minds. And none of us are involved in the church anymore. And to me, that turns out to have been a freedom for my family.
And what a pivotal moment that turns out to be. And I'm very interested to understand, let your people free can be interpreted in a vast variety of ways. But you brought it home and you brought it to something very specific. How did you know how did you arrive at a certainty that that's what that meant to you, that that's what this voice was saying to you?
Yeah, good, very good question. And I got to say that it has evolved, like many things having to do, I think, with the soul. The messages that you receive from your soul have layers of meaning. And I think the initial meaning was that, and that came after like careful thought and recognition, And also, it came with like an awakening. I realized that the figures I saw on that first day out there, each one of those people was a freedom fighter who had led people and tried to set them free. Each one of those things. And so my soul was saying, look, you got to be like these guys. You got to let and the tree, I mean, it's through hardship and everything and still stands proud. You can't cow me. I am free to be the tree that I am. So it has evolved, Robert, as you know, to the point that I now try to teach this stuff. And my people, you're one of my people. And I have a bunch of people, who are students at Sophia University, and we've expanded into China. We have a couple hundred students in China now. We're expanding into Korea, hopefully soon Vietnam. The definition of my people keeps growing, and this is the message, like listen to your soul.
And I can't help but observe that in this loss of a substantial material wealth and this journey of listening, of this vision quest, this hearing of this voice, this listening, and heeding the voice, and then bringing it home to a departure from a religious life. 100% of your family also left, right? You made this journey from a life of affluence, material accomplishment, and religion to a life less focused on the material and more spiritual, and ultimately becoming a professor of spiritual psychology, eco-psychology, and I think it's worth emphasizing shamanism, which was central to your own journey. You've talked a lot about heeding the symbols, and I know that myth and symbol are central to your field of study. What would you say to someone who's listening to this conversation right now and trying to find the meaning in the experiences and symbols that are unfolding for them?
Yeah, really good question. I think that the important message that I would try to convey is that we all, as modern humans, have to get out of our heads a little bit. And by that, I mostly mean just quiet our egos. One way to do that, an extreme way maybe, is to fast for 4 days and go out in the wilderness alone. But there are other ways. Like meditation is a really good way to quiet your ego. And then realize that it's pretty unlikely that your soul is going to speak to you in English or whatever language, your ego speaks. It's going to try to speak to you in symbols. And some of those symbols are archetypal. I mean, they're symbols that mean the same thing to everybody all around the world for, like I said, 40,000 years. And some of those symbols are very particular to you and have meaning only to you. So I would say, pay attention to your soul. And some of the ways your soul will speak to you is like you can quiet in meditation, get quiet and and listen. Listen with the ears of your heart, I always like to say, to the other voices within you. And um, pay attention to your dreams. I believe dreams are, and the symbols in your dreams, as you reflect on those, or if you share them with someone, that's often how you finally, you'll have that aha moment like I had about the rocks. So there's a cool poem I'd like to do if you don't mind, that kind of
That
expresses
would be
this
wonderful.
very
Thank
idea. Yeah. This is a poem by David Knight. It was one of my favorite. And it's, the soul lives contented by listening. If it wants to change into the beauty of terrifying shapes, it tries to speak. That is why you will not sing, afraid as you are of who may join with you. Voice hesitant and her hand trembling in the dark for yours, she touches your face and says your name in the same moment, the one you refuse to say over and over, the one you refuse to say.
That feels like a great place to leave this conversation. There is so much more we could talk about, and I would love the opportunity if you would come back again for a follow-up conversation, in particular about this relationship between the ecology and the self,
I would
which
love to talk about that.
it's so infused with the journey you just shared with us and so much to unpack. And I think it's a whole separate episode unto itself. So I would be deeply grateful if we could talk about that sometime in the near future.
Always happy to talk with you, Robert, anytime.
Dr. Wood, thank you very much for joining us. And thank you all for being with us for this program. We'll be back again next week with another.